Okay. Great. Any questions from topics this morning so far? Then let's talk about confined space. Confined space is, we've all been in confined spaces, whether you know it or not. And you'd be surprised what is considered a confined space, because the definition, although very specific, opens up a world of potential areas that you probably wouldn't normally say is a confined space. So what is a confined space? Well, there's 3 criteria. One, your body must be able to enter the space. And the definition is specifically, if you can break the plane of the entrance, even with your hand, a finger, once any part of your body has broken that plane, you have made entry. So you stick your hand in, you've made entry into that location. Okay, number 2, has limited egress. So you're in the area, there's one, and what's limited, open for interpretation, it basically means there's only like one way out. Or there's something that blocks your ability to get out easily. So that's limited or restricted egress. And then 3, it's not designated for continuous occupancy. Okay, it might be something, and we'll look at some examples here in a moment. But those are the 3 criteria. When you think about that, these could be areas even inside a normal office building. It could be in the basement where the utilities are located, in a room that's got a lot of equipment. There's only one door. You can enter it. You have restricted access. It's not built for people to be working in there continuously like an office or this room and such. So it can be places that you don't normally think about or consider confined space. Now, a confined space doesn't necessarily mean it's inherently hazardous. It just means it can be. And we'll talk a little more about that too. But let me look at this video first. Because this hits home. Why do we not have sound? Well, I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on. Let's test that it works. Well, I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on. There's not a lot of verbal communication going on here, but can everyone see that? Do I need to dim the lights? So here's a supervisor yelling down, "Hey, what's going on? Is everyone okay?" And do you see a pattern here? So he goes, "Hey, give me a flashlight." He says, I see 3 guys. I think they're smothered. Give me the gas mask. I mean, at least he was thinking there could be some toxic environment. He goes, the other guy says, okay, I'll get a rope. I'll throw it down to you, and then I'll pull him up. So you can't hear the narrator, but basically, this is very common in confined space situations where someone is in a confined space, there's a toxic atmosphere, and someone goes down. And of course, the coworkers want to help that person. They go into to rescue, and that person goes down. And so that situation, obviously this is a simulation but that's a true story. That happens so many times. In fact, more people are killed, or more people die trying to rescue someone than the person who is trying to be rescued. The number of people, the rescuers are greater than the rescuees, because you end up with multiple rescuers. So there are regulations on confined space. They're very stringent. There's a lot of requirements for training. There's requirements that you have a written plan. There's unpermitted and permitted confined spaces. Now, unpermitted or non-permitted confined space are the vast majority of locations that would be considered and defined as a confined space. A permitted confined space must meet one of these or more of these criteria here. It has the potential, or it does contain a hazardous atmosphere. Potential for engulfment. Engulfment means water, soil, grain, like grain silos, something that can trap the person. You can be trapped, and that doesn't necessarily mean engulfment, but there could be just the configuration of the space that you could end up getting stuck or trapped, or of course lack of oxygen, or any other serious health risk or hazard. So it's very broadly defined, but it's up to the employer to figure that out. Does a space, is it confined, permit confined space? Now, the permit is not a permit you go to the local government and you pay a fee and some reviews your permit and gives it to you. It's a self administered program. So your employer has a confined space program. They've identified the confined spaces. They have form that you fill out, it gets reviewed, so on and so forth. And then you put the permit on the confined space before you do entry. So it's very formal, it requires a lot of training, way beyond what we're talking about here. But confined spaces that have hazards in them obviously are potentially very, very dangerous. So here are some photographs of some potential confined spaces. So, would you consider this a confined space? Remember, what are the three criteria? You can enter it, limited egress, and not built for continuous human occupancy. So, obviously, you can enter this drum. It's not built for human occupancy. Limited egress, certainly. Is a potential, so by definition, you could call this a confined space. Does it have a potential for a hazardous atmosphere? Sure. So this could be considered a permitted confined space. What about this hole in the ground? Absolutely confined space. Permitted? Absolutely. Because engulfment, sides cave in. What about this gigantic hole? Is it confined space? You don't see the whole picture, but this is a 30-foot diameter hole, and that's about 15, 20 feet deep. Absolutely confined space. Permitted? In this case, it was not. This was a project that I had in Washington State, a cleanup. What you don't see is there's another ladder system on the other side of the excavation. So you had two ways to get out. So it was not considered confined because it wasn't limited egress. Tanks, by definition, are a confined space, and really, unless it only holds water or held water, it's probably a permitted confined space. This definitely would meet that. What about this pipe? Confined space? I would probably argue that it's not. Obviously, you can enter it, but limited egress. No, it doesn't really look like it. Now, if the back of it was blocked by whatever, equipment up against the trailer back here or something, then yeah, it would be a confined space. Permitted, possibly. Depends on what was in the pipe and such. What about a sewer? Absolutely confined space. And this would it be considered permitted? Absolutely. You can see the water here. And that water level can change very quickly. And then you have engulfment. So absolutely permitted. What about this hole? Yep. I'm not sure about the safety of having two poles holding up a gigantic rock here, but at least the guy has some way to get out through. I think these poles are here maybe to keep pulling the rock up. He's got his hard hat on, though. Give him credit for that. And one of the most common confined spaces that we come across are trenches and other excavations. And how many of you have been in a trench? And how many times have you dropped something and bent over to pick it up, leaning into the trench? I've done that. And there is case study after case study of why that's a really bad idea. Because you never know when that trench is going to give away. And there's been plenty of people who have reached down, and that's when the hole collapses. And that's where your head is. And the soil is very dense, hard to pull someone out. So it can happen very quickly. And of course there's regulations on shoring, trenches, and the slope that you must have if you don't have shoring and such. And really anything over a couple feet becomes a problem. So be careful. Okay, let's talk about any questions about confined spaces. So when you're at a facility, that might be one of the questions you ask. Do you have confined spaces? Are they permitted, unpermitted? Where are they? And, the workers there might feel comfortable going into them, but, you don't know the situation. So avoid them. Great, let's talk about ways to recognize hazards. And we'll start off with this little video clip, and hopefully the sound works on this one.
Follow! But follow only if ye be men of valor. For the entrance to this cave is guarded by a creature so foul, so cruel, that no man yet has fought with it and lived. Bones of full 50 men lie strewn about its lair. So, brave knight, if you do doubt your courage or your strength, come no further, for death awaits you all with nasty big pointy teeth.
What an eccentric performance.
The other side.
Then we best leave them here and carry on foot. Dismount!
Behold the cave of Cardano.
Right. Keep me covered. What with? Well, just keep me covered.
Too late.
What?
There is.
Where?
There.
What, behind the rabbit?
It is the rabbit.
You silly sod!
What?
You got us all worked up!
Well, it's no ordinary rabbit. That's the most foul, cruel, and bad-tempered rodent you ever set eyes on.
You tit! I saw my arm and I was so scared.
Look, that rabbit's got a vicious streak a mile wide. It's a killer.
Get stuck.
It'll do you a treat, mate.
Yeah, manky Scots git.
I'm warning you.
What's he do? Nibble your bum?
He's got huge, sharp... he can leap about... Look at the bones.
Go on, boys, chop his head off. Right, silly little bleeder. One rabbit stew coming right up.
Look. Jesus Christ! I warned you.
I've done it again.
I warned you, but did you listen to me? Oh, no, you knew it all, didn't you? Oh, it's just a harmless little bunny, isn't it? Well, it's always the same. I always tell them.
Shut up!
Do they listen to me?
Right!
Oh, no. Shut up!
Right, how many did we lose, Gawain? Hector and Bors, that's 5. Fleeta, 3. Well, we'd better not risk another frontal assault. That rabbit's dynamite.
Would it help to confuse it if we ran away more?
Oh, shut up and go and change your armor.
So, my Python, Search for the Holy Grail. I'm a big fan. But the point of this little hilarious little episode here is, how many times were they warned about a hazard? And did they recognize the hazard? They could see it. They didn't believe it. And I think this is very true of our day-to-day work life. We know what all the hazards are. And we even may recognize them and see them, but we get used to them, and we don't, I've never had a problem with this particular hazard. It's never affected me. I've never been hit by a piece of heavy equipment. I've never been contaminated. I've never been ill from exposure, blah, blah, blah. And there's so many different hazards out there, and we have to take them serious all the time, because even the benign ones can be a serious problem, depending on the situation. So, how do we recognize a hazard? Well, we can perform what's called a job hazard analysis. This is a formal process of reviewing the different tasks you do and looking at potential hazards and then how to avoid them. And I'll talk a little more about that. There's training, like this one, other trainings you take, specific topics that tell you about different types of hazards. Safety plans, if you work on a hazardous waste site and such, then you have a formal plan. But for the inspections that you do you have a safety plan? No, there's no requirement to have a safety plan. You have nothing written other than maybe the health and safety manual that your department has that you've probably read once and forgotten about. So your safety plan is right up here. It's things that you think about when you go out into the field. Things like, what are the hazards? Where's my emergency exit? Do I need PPE? If I need PPE, protect myself from contamination. What are those contaminants? How do I decon myself if I get contaminated? Who's my buddy? All these things are part of a safety plan. And if they're not written, they got to be in your brain. So things you got to think about. Experience. Obviously, as you go into your career, you learn more, you experience more. That teaches you about the different types of hazards. If you don't have a lot of experience, that's where your buddy comes in. You get someone who's been in the facility before, who's got knowledge of certain operations and such that can teach you the ropes. Common sense, we've talked about that. Thinking before you're acting. Isn't it something your mom taught you? Think before you act. Can't say anything nice, don't say it at all. These little things make a difference. Think about what you're doing. Of course, we've talked about, not tasting, smelling, touching, just use sight and hearing. Placards, markings, labels are a great way to determine different types of hazards. And there's a lot of them. We're not going to go over these in detail. But there's one in particular that's very useful for you as an inspector when you go to a facility. And that's the NFPA label right there. It's in the front of all buildings, all entrances to a building that have certain hazardous materials that meet a criteria that the fire department regulates. And it's a great way to tell very quickly, potentially, that there are hazards in a facility. There are also a lot of different labels and signs that OSHA requires facilities to have. And these range, eye protection, chlorine gas, officer's hazard, buddy system required before entry. This is probably a confined space type of situation. Dangerous when hot. The old slip, trips, and falls, one of the biggest hazards. Glove required, so on and so forth. This is one of my favorites. Caution. Admittance to authorized personnel only. Who's authorized? Who are these people? And who authorizes them? If you have to ask any of these questions, you're not authorized. And therefore, you don't belong there. Now, the idea of this sign is that you don't go in there. Unless, of course, if you're escorted by a facility rep or whatever. And I think it's a CYA type of sign. It means you go in there and something happens to you, we're not liable. Because we posted the sign, said don't go in there. If you get injured, that's your problem. So, signs do matter. The NFPA placard I mentioned is a very quick way to get a relative sense of potential hazards in a facility. So how it works is there's 4 different diamonds, the fire hazard on the top, And this was developed for firefighters, so it's geared towards them. The higher the number, the higher the hazard. Fire, health, reactivity, so chemicals that react that can cause toxic fumes and such, explosions. And then a specific symbol for other types of things like oxidizers, radioactivity, or something that's water reactive. So the higher the number, the higher the hazard. It doesn't tell you what the chemicals are. You can find these on individual containers and such, but it's just a quick snapshot of potential hazards. So be aware of these when you walk in a facility, and ask them, why do you have this placard? What's here that's, that hazardous that it is a health 3 or 4, whatever the case may be. And signs really do have a purpose. And so this one's interesting. It says hot. This is an electrical panel. So, the hot from an electrical standpoint. But then read the other one. It says, be careful. Snakes inside. And sure enough, there are snakes inside. Kind of a bizarre situation, but, signs have a purpose. Okay, let's talk about how we avoid hazards. There are 3 techniques: engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. PPE being your last line of defense. It's always better to use engineering controls first, and then administrative PPE last. So we'll go through each of these. Okay, engineering controls are a way to eliminate the hazard completely. So it could be dust control, it could be some ventilation, barrier tape, guards around machinery that just keeps you from coming in contact with the hazard. Is what an engineering control does. Administrative controls are more of procedures, limits on exposure, training, signs, placards, labels, and such. So it's not going to necessarily prevent you from coming in contact with the hazard, but it gives you some awareness. And then last is the PPE. And of course, there's all different types of PPE depending on the situation. Now, the thing about PPE is, since it's your last line of defense, I think it tends to be abused. People put the PPE on, they think, these gloves make me impervious to the chemical I'm coming in contact with. And I think it's a false sense of security, because every type of PPE will eventually have breakthrough. And chemicals will get through virtually every material after a certain amount of time. So don't look at PPE as being super protective necessarily, and you have to select the right PPE, and you have to wear it correctly. We saw the picture of the guy who had the rash on his arm because he had gloves and he didn't tape up correctly, or didn't have a suit that was chemically protective. I find this is most people do not wear their PPE correctly. They don't select the right PPE. The most common abused type of health hazard we get ourselves into. And eye protection is so important, because you just never know when something is going to come at your eye. And this is real story. A naval shipman using a sewing machine, the needle breaks and goes straight into his eyeball, and thank God he had eye protection on, because it stuck right into his safety goggles or glasses. Without it, went right through his eye. Probably would have blinded him. We only have 2 eyes, and they're located right next to each other. We're terribly designed human beings when you think about it. Martians are better. They have their eyes kind of articulated over here, and way better design. Okay, I mentioned the job hazard analysis. This is a formal process of analyzing your job duties and the hazards that could come with them. And once you identify the hazard, then you can identify ways to control it, mitigate that hazard. And it's a way to reduce risk to you, build your confidence because you know what you're getting yourself into and how to handle it. And it's very simple to do. It doesn't take a long time to do one. And the first is describe the task. So maybe your task is, I am going to a recycling facility to do an inspection. Okay, that's the task. What are the hazards that you would find at a recycling facility? There are a bunch of them. Anyone? Heavy equipment. Gases, like someone said. Slip, trips, and falls. Sharps. Could be animals. Maybe this facility has a guard dog. Maybe it could be an owner who's ornery. It could be noise because it's an enclosed area, a lot of heavy equipment. There could be chemicals there, depending on the type of recycling facility. There's probably a bunch others. So you identify all these hazards, and you talk about the controls. How are you going to control noise? Well, that's easy. You have hearing protection. Now, how do you control the dog guarding the place? Well, you make arrangements with the owner and say, I'm coming at this particular time. Can you please restrain your dog and lock them down so I can roam freely without being, worried about this dog biting me? So every hazard has a way to control it. OSHA has a form and a booklet that talks to you about how you can perform these JHAs, they call them, and it's a very simple process. And they're becoming more and more common. In fact, a lot of my work, I can't go to perform a job until I've done a job hazard analysis and provide it to my client. And it's becoming one of the standards in dealing with health and safety. Even if you have a formal safety plan, they become part of your safety plan. So check it out. Things that you think about performing a job hazard analysis are, questions. What can go wrong? What are the consequences of this particular hazard? Could it occur? How likely is it to occur? Are there other factors that influence that particular hazard? All these things you think about and you document and try to control as much as you can. And really, to me, when it comes to avoiding hazards, it is very simple. Slow down, stop every once in a while, think about what's going on around you, observe where the heavy equipment is, where you are, where the hazards are. How am I going to get away from this? How am I protecting myself? Things we do this constantly as human beings. We have an instinct to survive, and we're constantly doing this. The computer in the back of our brain is analyzing situations all the time. But sometimes you have to kind of slow down because we get so focused in doing our job and wanting to get it done and get on to the next task. And we don't stop and realize what's going on around us. So sometimes you just have to slow down and check out what's going on. So here are some various snapshots in time, scenes that have multiple different hazards. So there's no right or wrong answer here. But what hazards do you see in this particular scene here, or potential hazard? Workplace violence? Yeah, potentially there could be some, vagrants that live, hanging out here. So invading their space, and you never know, they might be on drugs. They're in a gang. They're trying to protect their turf. Absolutely. What else? Trip, slips, and falls. Yep. I'm sorry. Oh. Anyone else? What else? How about, could there be biological agents here? It's a messy place. There could be rodents and who knows? People may have been living here. It could be feces, urine, sharps. Look at the condition of the building itself could be a hazard. Some pretty obvious hazards here. What's in these buckets? Are these liquids? Is it just dirty water? Are they volatile, flammable, oil? We don't really know. Can't see if there's labels. Even if there are labels, do you trust them? Cans, drums, it can contain anything. All kinds of potential hazards there. So here's a drilling operation. That's a drill rig right there. This has got all kinds of hazards going on. Besides the drill rig itself, you've got a bunch of bags of grout, and maybe some are full, probably all are empty. That's a trip hazard there. Look at this guy's vehicle. I think it's so dilapidated, it's probably a hazard in itself. You've got electrical lines here, which of course would be a serious overhead hazard with a tall drill rig. You've got, I think it's hard to tell, but there's a fuel tank right here in the back of the truck. So flammable liquid. What about this location? What kind of hazards? Well, first of all, what is this liquid here? Is it water? Sewage? Could be sewage, and there's all kinds of hazards in sewage. You got heavy equipment here. Not only is the fact that it's a truck, but this is a suction device, high suction to pull the water out. That alone there is a hazard. Look at the condition of the ground. It's wet, muddy, loose, potentially. Get too close, you could slip in. Who knows how deep that is? So all kinds of hazards here. What about this recycling facility? What's the first thing you see? The smoke or dust. This is dust coming up from this pile of debris here. What's in that dust? I don't know. Who knows? What other hazards? Obviously, you got the heavy equipment. Could be sharps. A chicken? I'm sorry. Oh, trip. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Trip, slips, and falls. You're in a building with heavy equipment. What do you think the noise level is going to be? It's going to be loud. What about just visibility? You got a skylight, a door over here, but it could be kind of dark, hard to see. Certainly when you get on the edges, maybe in corners, things are stacked up. A lot of different hazards here. This is a compost pile. So what hazards are associated with compost? Methane, pathogens. So what, of course, slip, trips, and falls, uneven ground. What made this pile, what created this giant pile of debris? Heavy equipment. Absolutely. There's some heavy equipment that pushed this pile here. Where's that heavy equipment? We don't see it in this photo, but it's around there somewhere. Maybe it's behind the pile. So that's the pile, and you're over here. You don't see all this activity going on. But we've got trucks. We've got a piece of heavy equipment here loading debris into this chipper. This is a gigantic chipper. These things take big stumps and grind them up. And occasionally they spit out a chunk of the log, and it goes flying 30 feet in the air. And you're over here doing your inspection, and it lands on your head. So you have to be aware of what your surroundings and what's going on. I love this one. So you have a containment area for your liquids, and you put the pallet on the edge of the containment area that happens to have a leaky drum that leaks out of your containment area. Now, is that just waste oil? Or was it a solvent that's been mucked up? We don't know. And you as an inspector, it's not your problem from the standpoint you need to figure out what it is. The facility needs to clean it up and come up with a better containment system. Again, drums are some of the most hazardous. Containers are so hazardous. You never know what's in a container. Never trust the label. Even when you're walking through an active facility, you just don't know what's in there. Okay, landfill. All kinds of hazards in landfill. Slip, trips, and falls, sharps, heavy equipment. You got a bunch of debris here. What's in that debris? You name a hazard, it's in a landfill. Absolutely. And because you have trash and food products, what else is attracted to landfills? Varmints, wild animals. Great. Let's talk a little bit about workplace violence. Again, this module here does not meet the requirements of a formal, in-depth workplace violence training, which I highly recommend all of you taking at least once. It's such an important topic. You as public agents are, of course, a target for all the wackos out there. People expect you to solve their problems, and so that makes your job when you arrived at a facility all the more difficult. And there are, of course, numerous case studies of inspectors going to facilities just to do a simple inspection, and bad things happen. I don't know if you remember one of the more unfortunate cases that happened. I believe it was in Oakland, an inspector at a meat packing facility, and they had a history of problems with this particular facility. They were not compliant. The owner was basically belligerent, hated the inspectors to the point where they started going in groups. Literally, it was 2, 3, 4 inspectors would show up at the same time just because they were so worried about what this guy might do. On this particular day, I believe there were 4 inspectors that came into the facility, and the guy went ballistic and took out a gun and killed one of the inspectors, shot at the others. I believe 1 or 2 of them were wounded, but escaped. And they certainly expected this guy to go and shoot them, but they knew he was a potential time bomb. So you got to be careful. Of course, workplace violence is, can be other types of instances besides, someone gunning you down. But of course, it's completely unacceptable. This can happen with a coworker, and there's different types of workplace violence. It could be even intimidation, or someone harassing you can be considered workplace violence. It can happen anywhere where you are doing your job and while you're on the job. It could be in the office, it could be in a hallway, it could be in a parking lot. And by and far, most of them can be prevented. And I encourage you, again, take classes, learn how to diffuse a situation. We're not going to go in depth on that, how to deal with people who are hostile, but there are techniques you can learn to diffuse a situation and be able to handle yourself and get yourself out of the situation. But look at some statistics here. 2009, these statistics take a while to roll up, so this is the latest that I could find. Kind of unbelievable. It takes years for these to get published. But so 2009, 572,000 people victims of a non-fatal violent crime. 80% were simple assaults, 20% serious violent assault or crime. And you suspect, police officers, security guards are very high risk, bartenders, convenience store workers. Over 500 workplace homicides in 2009. 80% were killed by a gun. Gun control, gun issues are big right now in this country. Interesting statistic. The good news is these rates have been dropping for years, many years. The past 20 years, there's been a steady drop, which is good. And again, we're talking about workplace homicides, not after work. So again, a workplace is anywhere you're doing your job, whether it be in the office, going to a location, at a facility. If you're doing your job, that's considered a workplace. It doesn't have to be in your cubicle, your office. There are three main types of violence. There's verbal abuse or threats, threatened behavior, like someone's going to hit you or physically accost you, and then of course they actually assault you. And so any one of these in itself or combined is considered workplace violence. So even someone making a comment to you that you find as a potential threat could be considered workplace violence. And it can come from anyone. It could be a stranger, coworker, the facility owner, a worker at the facility, someone on the street as you're walking up to the facility, someone you have a close relationship with. A lot of workplace violence comes from people that you know, someone you work with, particular people you interact with on your job. That's the majority. So, we're going to finish way early. I can sit here and talk about other random things if you guys want to stay for another hour, but I think you have other things to do. And so I love ending my lectures with what I call the Almost Darwin Awards. So do you know what a Darwin Award is? When someone does something stupid and they die because of doing something stupid. Well, these are the people who are doing something stupid but didn't die. Because I don't want to make this totally morbid class. I mean, it is about, life and safety. So here's contestant number 1. Besides his wardrobe faux pas there, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. There is literally a whole series, what we call the ladder, the health and safety issues dealing with ladders, and this is one of 2 that I'll show you. But I mean, really, people are amazingly. We're problem solvers, and these guys had a problem to solve, and they've solved it. But my God, what kind of risk are they taking? Stupid. Now this one you have to look at closely here. So this is a swimming pool. This is a ladder, metal ladder in the pool. This is the worker who has waded through the water. So he's soaking wet up to his, above his belly. He's got an electric drill that has a cord that's coming down. I can't tell if it's actually in the water or not. It doesn't look like it is, but it's coming close. And at least he's got his safety goggles on. Of course, he's barefoot. on a slippery ladder, probably. Here's the best part is that's all alcohol. Beer, whiskey, vodka. Not sure how that fits in the picture, but check this out. People do stupid things. Talk about doing stupid things. Yep. This series of photographs, this is amazing. Absolutely amazing. But watch what this guy does with his backhoe. And the title here is, I think, the main point. You know, there's a fine line between trying to solve a problem, being innovative, and just being plain out stupid. And this is just plain out stupid. Now, I don't know what he's trying to do here, but it's crazy. And the new winner goes to these blokes sitting in their pool drinking beer on a hot afternoon in their little swimming pool. They got a table with their jam box. They need power to it. So they've got some sandals, flip-flops, that are supporting the power strip that they've plugged into, which then goes to another extension cord that goes to the house to get them power. And they're sitting around drinking beers, laughing about it. I mean, unbelievable, right? So, I mean, ultimately, whatever you learn in health and safety classes, it always comes down to one thing, though. You know, safety is about you. It's about you protecting your safety, your colleagues' safety, but ultimately you're responsible for it. There's nothing I can say or do that's going to stop you from doing something stupid, from getting too focused on your task and not paying attention to the slip, trip, and fall, the heavy equipment, whatever the situation is. So you got to take responsibility for your safety and protect yourself. And as my wise grandfather always taught me, that I learned since I was a little kid, it's always better to be safe than sorry. And please remember to save the antelopes. Thank you very much. I appreciate you hanging out, and hopefully you take away some inkling of safety that you'll be thinking about for the next year until you take your next health and safety class, probably HAZWOPER. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and maybe I'll see you next year. Actually, I want to see you next year because that means you were safe and you're able to come back. Take care. Thank you.